overcome established preferences and the desire to maintain the status quo? Anybody wants to jump in?
I just want to jump in and say at Van Meter, we make a try to not allow groupthink to become part of the decision-making process. We actually don't allow large decisions to be made at one meeting. It's always presented at the first meeting, and then everybody has time to do their follow-up research and come back to discuss it a second time. And I think that's important when you're trying to allow people the ability to come up with ideas outside the box to solve a problem that is currently in your company. So I just want to say that it avoids the go along mentality.
Thank you, Christopher. Anybody else want to tackle that question?
I'll just add, I think the one comment I would add to that question, I think, getting buy-in across the teams and, all of the different groups that are involved is so critical. We've really found that getting support, especially in an organization as large as ours, change is never easy. So adoption really magnifies the effectiveness of change. Something that my head of product design recently shared with me was a Six Sigma concept, which is quality times adoption equals effectiveness or excellence, which I thought was really resonant, especially with this topic. And getting that buy-in and helping to appreciate the why behind the what is so critical.
John, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I want to go back to Christopher. I really love your company's idea of failing forward. It's something that we use a lot of, is, you try it and you learn from your mistakes, which is really important. If we've always got to be questioning things, we do have a tendency to just do things, especially I think developers, I like I say, a lot of things have changed and a lot of things haven't changed. So many developers still think the same way. They still build the same way because it's easy. You don't challenge your trades. You don't challenge your people. I think that's important to do and continue to do to get over these challenges. And so, yeah, you're going to fail, accept it and learn from it. So I think that's a great attitude. And I think that's important to have as a company that wants to move forward.
Well, as I said in my remarks, I think government has a special role to play in nudging the private sector. I think that in many ways, the private sector leads on innovation, but in other ways, the private sector is not going to lead without government creating policies, processes, or incentives to do so. Especially when it comes to things like affordability, resilience, energy efficiency. I think it's government's job to sit down with private sector players and figure out ways that government can put incentives into place in order to nudge the private sector to go in that direction.
It's not necessarily housing, but we've been looking at what's happened in cities because of COVID and the amount of spaces that are now closed to cars and people are able to walk or bike or have public spaces that weren't there before. And a lot of cities aren't reverting back, at least not yet. But the ones that we've talked to are saying the neighborhood seems to like it. We should have done this a while ago. And it created a short period of time. We thought we were going to do this for a short period to allow for changes and these risks of, well, what if we had more narrow roads? What if this road wasn't even here? To be kind of short-lived, and the outcome was positive. And a lot of that was spurred by kind of these local municipalities and government saying, okay, let's create these zones that we're going to allow for changes in our zoning requirements. And it's led to these positive impacts in the community that may not go back. So
I think that, yeah, I think Greg also said it, that, municipalities, governments need to be at the table and we need to work with them. The private sector feels like their hands are tied because of zoning and fire ratings and all of the challenges that we have. but we just keep getting more and more piled up on us, it seems like, and we need to understand the reasons for them so we can come up with better solutions. And I think it works on both sides. I'm all about life safety, but sometimes it becomes so challenging that we've increased the cost of buildings in order to achieve some of this stuff. So having them at the table early on is really important so that everybody understands what's going on, what our goals are. I think that's important.
Thank you, guys. Next question. How do we, this might touch on what you have just mentioned actually, but how do we move the focus beyond first cost toward total cost of ownership, taking sustainability, resiliency, and energy efficiency into account?
I think Tripp did a really good job of explaining that in his early presentation. You know, you're thinking about, I think we got to convince people about the long-term investment. It's not a short-term payoff. We're not at the roulette table. We're at the slow burn. We got to realize that this is a long-term investment. It's not something that people aren't selling their houses after living in them 5 years anymore. They're living in them longer. So they need to invest in that idea of sustainability and durability.
So
Well,
I kind of looked
ahead.
at this as, oops, sorry, go ahead, Greg. Okay, I was looking at this as, you know, the high first cost is usually associated with new technologies and energy efficiency. And there's a big benefit by those two things I mentioned, but they have a high first cost that almost needs to be explained exactly what they're going to gain from getting those technologies in their product. Our powerhouse, for example, had all the latest alarm.com and insulation values, and it was a very expensive building to build. But by taking people through and explaining what they gain from it, they might be able to overcome that hurdle.
Thank you,
In
Chris.
Philadelphia, sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
So in Philadelphia, we have a slightly different problem because we have an aging housing stock primarily. The median age of a house in Philadelphia is 93 years old. And as I said before, you know, 1 in 4 people lives in poverty in Philadelphia. So we have aging housing stock and a low income population with a very high home ownership rate. So we've been focusing on how do we retrofit row houses to be more energy efficient, to be weatherized, and to remediate home health hazards. Like one of the major causes of kids going to the emergency room is asthma caused by home health hazards. And Children's Hospital of Philadelphia actually has provided us funding to remediate houses where they have children who have made multiple visits to the emergency room for asthma. But the problem was in 2018, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve came out with a report showing that Philadelphia homeowners who applied for home repair loans, who were low moderate income, had a 75% denial rate from commercial banks. So we want Philadelphia homeowners to be able to make those, you know, weatherization, health, safety, energy efficiency repairs to their homes, and they're being denied at a rate of 75% by banks. So we put a program into place 2.5 years ago called Restore, Repair, Renew, where we set the underwriting terms, private banks originate the loans, and then we buy them from the bank and we pay the bank to service it. So the bank has no risk. And they have to underwrite everybody. I mean, they have to originate every loan that meets our underwriting terms. So now 2.5 years in, we have almost a 60% approval rate compared with the 75% denial rate from the private sector. We have 0 defaults, and we have a lower delinquency rate than the private market loans. So our portfolio has a much higher success rate, much higher approval rate, and it performs better than the private market loans. Over 80% of our borrowers are people of color, and our average borrower income is about 65% of the area median. So we are successfully making loans to low moderate income borrowers, to borrowers of color, We have twice the approval rate of the private sector, and our loans are performing better. And they're originated by private banks, so we don't have to build the capacity on the public sector side to do loan underwriting and origination. So that to me is a win-win-win public-private partnership solution.
I'll can just quickly add, there's, PACE program is another opportunity to move that time scale, to get people thinking about it. That's available for residential market. I would also just like on the behavioral side, there's an example from the UK. There's a group, the Nudge unit, that works with government programs in the UK. And one of the programs that they worked with was a energy savings program that was free for people, or reduced cost for people to put in spray foam insulation in their homes in the UK. And it was they had more money than they had participants willing to do it. And this behavioral group came in and realized that the problem was that people had so much crap in their attic that they didn't want to take advantage of the program, because they'd have to move it all out in order to spray foam their homes. So they changed the marketing of the program to be about free cleaning out of your attic. And oh, by the way, when we clean it out, we're going to spray foam your home. And the success of the program of increasing the spray foam insulation in homes in the UK drastically went up by changing the framing of the program. And so that's an example of, again, understanding clients and behavioral science, and how do we market these types of programs in a way that meets users.
Thank you,
Thanks, Tripp. Hi, sorry, Karima, I just jumped
Go ahead,
back in.
thank
I just wanted to invite any of our attendees to submit questions into the chat box if they have anything else they'd like to share with our panelists. I'd also like to bring up one question that came back through our team through one of the chat boxes as well, which is, we'll direct it to Van Metre, then I'd like to go around the room. How have you been taking trade contractors and code officials along on your journey, Chris?
That is a good question, because when you're constantly changing the way you do business, and especially with the offsite construction, there's a lot of state programs you have to go through. And unfortunately, that industrialized housing programs in all the states do not link up directly with the county officials. So the county officials are used to inspecting everything. And what we found was that you have to get your third-party inspectors involved with the county officials, where you literally have a meeting where everybody divides up what they're going to look at. And that's a challenge. And our trade partners, I mentioned how we're trying to figure out how to get the plumbers and the electricians into our factory. Well, we're not there yet. So we're treating, we had to create basically deals with our trade partners that they treat our factory as a construction site. So they would schedule people to come into the factory as needed, as we need them in the production line of our modular. So it's kind of like we call them vendors, because we have a long-term relationship with them. So they're willing to do that, but that's a tricky kind of threshold when you go from infield to factory. Do you have to hire everybody? And there's other ways around it. That's the outside the box. We are working with our vendors to make it all kind of make a nice transition. So.
Great. John, I see you shaking your head. Anything you'd like to add to this exercise, having recently designed a full, a community delivered in modular technologies? You're on mute, John.
That first project I shared was one of the first projects that the developer did using panelized system. And it took them a while to get the framers on board. But now that they're doing it and they realize that they can get, 2 houses up in 4 days, it's kind of changed their attitude. They're still learning, but it's really turned out to be a good experience for them all. I think that our challenges right here in Colorado is we've had an atrophy of plan reviewers and code and inspectors, and so we're re-educating a lot of these people about what needs to be done. I think it's it's a side effect of the COVID situation, but I think it's an opportunity to help teach people how to think a little bit differently than just the old ways. And it's been a bit of a challenge explaining how these systems work to some of these inspectors and permit reviewers. So it's an ongoing challenge, but I think we'll get there.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. So it looks like actually we're going to have to wrap up. So, one of the things I recognized as I was, observing this panel, a lot of great information we can cover here, and it's a lot to cover in just a short period of time. What I'd love to see is this conversation continue in the working groups that are going to take place immediately following this session. So up on the screen, you see that we are going to be rolling into our working groups at 2:15 Eastern time. So just in about 10 minutes, you go back to our website on the event page, click the attend session, and then join button next to the working group that you'd like to participate in. You have the option to participate in a working group that will follow on from this morning, or the session we held earlier today on education. And then you can also choose to participate in this one on behavior. Before we break, I would just like to say thank you to all of our panelists for coming in and sharing your insights. Karima, thank you for facilitating this conversation and opening this up for us. And with that, just hope to see as many of you as possible. Join us in those working groups and continue the dialogue. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Denise.
See everybody soon.